Hey everybody, it's Party Elite, and today we're taking a look at the second part of the Total War Three Kingdoms diplomacy reveal. As with the previous video, there is more than meets the eye here. I'll be going through it in a fair bit of detail, pointing out all the interesting little tidbits that might get missed at a glance, and as far as the diplomacy itself is concerned, I'll cover that in a broader fashion. With no time to waste, let's dive in. First things first, we see some slight UI changes, a clear indication that a lot is yet to be set in stone. From visual changes such as these icons that are now encased in circles to the presence of the word marching here. While all the armies selected in the video are marching, I wonder if this is where one clicks to change stances. A small thing, but it wasn't in the previous video, thought I'd point it out. Immediately, we get this resilience trait highlighted. Now, is this an indicator of what affects loyalty and satisfaction on clear display? If it was just a health indicator, we'd surely see a bar or something much simpler, perhaps something more numeric. Now, we do see resilience mentioned again later, and I'll touch on that when the time comes. We also see some new traits. Charismatic is clearly a potential double-edged sword among subordinates, as it seems to increase the desire for independence. Arrogant has a worthwhile effect as well, as we can see the reduced chance of evading capture post-battle. Does that mean we're back in a world where characters can be ransomed, released, or executed after being captured? Or does this refer to the general's retinue and how likely they are to be captured after battle? And then we see Vain as a trait as well, which shows us that physical traits are absolutely worth considering, including the likes of scarring. This only furthers my desire to see traits get attached to individuals as time goes on through their actual actions. A general who gets hurt in battle often but survives always would end up heavily scarred, for example. Now, freezing over here, we can see that the character is actually listed as a legendary character, and we can see the effects that come as a result of that, both from the character and the faction-specific effects as well.
There are now two key forms of alliance: coalitions and military alliances. Each offers different levels of choice, commitment, and control.
Now, I'm not sure if the next season in this section over here suggests seasonal variance, or if it's actually just the heading for all the per-turn calculations that seem to be outlined right below. I'd imagine that things would be indented if that was the case, so I have reason to believe that maybe the season actually affects the harvest and things like that, which would be a nice touch. It would make sense. And now here we see additional descriptors that we'd initially noticed during the previous video. The first simply states that the player is of the noble rank and the resulting effects of that. The second is Lineage respectable. Now here we learn a few things. Secure is the name given to occupy a settlement, that's the action's name, and having a respectable lineage means you get better replenishment and supply when securing a settlement. It also reduces the cost of retinue recruitment for captains, and it increases replenishment rate in general. More interestingly, however, is the fact that it can fade over time. So are there certain objectives that must be hit to keep the lineage alive? Will you get missions that give big boosts to lineage at any given time? Are there certain actions that'll further fade it away, perhaps? I'd be curious to see what the variety is here, and we do get a glimpse of it in just a moment's time. And then finally over here, we actually see that being a threat remains a source of diplomatic issues. Now, this is the first kind of source of concern for me. I've never liked the whole aversion to power thing that stops treaties from being signed. It seems like I'm being directly punished for having played the game well. I'd rather see things like smaller factions forming coalitions to protect themselves against me, or people being more likely to join their allies in a war against me, rather than a direct numerical malice on my own chances. I feel like an indirect solution would be a lot more immersive. I'd rather see the AI band together and work together against me than simply see a cold hard no in response to treaties that are often mutually beneficial. If I'm saying I'm going to give you food for a little bit of money, or military access for example, why would you say no? I could strong-arm you if I wanted to, so I've never liked that malice when it comes to diplomacy. So it's a little unfortunate to see it here again. I'd much rather see the AI be a bit more clever with how it deals with overbearing and powerful nations and warlords and things like that. Just a small note, again, things are open to change. Obviously, it's a balancing act, especially for the mid and late games, but I just, again, wish it was more than a straight reduction of my chances of getting things done. I want to be cut down to size by a smart AI. I don't want them to just be whiny children saying no to things. It all comes down to the same outcome, but it's about the journey, not the destination, right? Now here, hovering over this bar, we finally see the mechanics behind Lineage. Now I'm curious if each dynasty will have its own modifiers, but it's clear that here at least, having the faction leader deployed in an army moves us up by 5, while the constant tick of time will reduce Lineage by 5 per season. There's a maximum lineage of 100, and one can assume the higher the current lineage, the better its boons. We will later see evidence of that actually. Now worth noting is that this lineage bar was not in the previous video. Is that because there was no lineage to protect, or was the feature simply not implemented at the time, or was it, again, a matter of the user interface changing between the two videos being recorded? Now further down the line, as I mentioned, this bar is hovered over again when it's a fair bit lower, and as we can see, most of the benefits are lost. We also see, however, that alliances can help buff up the lineage meter.
And simply by being in a coalition or alliance with other warlords, your diplomatic standing with the other members increases. Coalitions and military alliances also benefit the mobility of your armies. Here we're in the early phases of a campaign playing as Yuan Shao, who's currently besieging a town owned by the Han Empire.
Now here we get confirmation that supplies are in fact a thing in the game, and we get some details as to how exactly they affect things. At max supply, we see some pretty great boons to morale and replenishment, but it's quite clear that being in enemy territory is a huge hit to supplies, and based on climate, we're going to see supplies dwindle at a faster or slower rate. I'm definitely happy to see supplies get drained so quickly. It should hopefully slow the pace of aggressive expansion down by a fair bit, and I do hope that marching an army on an empty stomach will have dire consequences, not just with attrition as indicated here, but also with some stat debuffs perhaps. Have you ever tried swinging a sword on an empty stomach? I can't imagine it's all that pleasurable. Here we see as well that at 60% supplies, there are still buffs to morale and replenishment, but we see just how slow supply regeneration can be. Again, that's a nice way to force an aggressive campaign to slow down. I'll be curious to see just how increased food reserves scale to speed aggressive maneuvering up, but right now I like what I'm seeing. I mentioned this with Thrones of Britannia. I liked the idea of the mechanic, but I felt like it wasn't punishing enough, at least at launch. It didn't stop you from just completely ignoring your supplies, and here it looks like we've evolved from that. And if you just ignore your supplies and you keep on a long march, you will start suffering from attrition pretty quickly. And, plus points for that, from me at least.
Coalitions and military alliances give you new tracts of friendly territory in which to rest, replenish, and resupply before striking out into enemy lands once more.
Now before we dive right into the great explanation from Al, I just want to mention that I really like the idea of coalitions. We've seen them in other games and they make sense. They are unifying bonds formed over some common cause. They aren't as strict as alliances, but they can be the foundations of one. Coalitions should act as deterrents for a particularly aggressive opposition force, and they should act as a stabilizer for regional strength. That, in my opinion, is the biggest positive factor of the coalition. If something is scary, smaller factions bond together to keep that scary thing at bay.
So let's break down the two forms of alliance. A coalition is a looser, lower commitment sort of arrangement than a military alliance. Forming a coalition is relatively easy as long as you have a neutral or better diplomatic standing with the other party.
Now clearly the formation and ending of coalitions has some lasting effects and diplomatic penalties, and as we look at the details across the factions here, we see the return of some typical modifiers. Treaties, past friendships, treaties with friends and enemies, war with mutual enemies, it's the standard fare here.
Being at war with a mutual enemy is also a definite bonus, of course. Let's see if we can get a coalition signed with Liu Bei. He names his price, which we can well afford, and yes, the pact is signed. Now, if we arrange the diplomatic faction list by group, we can see we're now part of the newly formed Thundering Sky Coalition.
Now, I think it's pretty cool that the coalitions are named, to be honest. I'm curious just how the names are going to be generated, or if they're going to be completely random, regardless of the constituents. It'd be pretty neat if the coalition names are based on, who the members are, the kind of armies they field, the situation they find themselves in. It'd be a nice touch. It would help bring the campaigns to life. Not an important thing, but again, I always love things that bring the campaigns to life, add a bit of personality, and I feel like generated names rather than picked out of a hat names would make a big difference.
Once a coalition is signed, any member can invite another warlord to join. But like many major actions that a warlord wishes to perform in a coalition, the consent of all parties is required. So if we go on to invite a new warlord to the coalition, for example, the action will be voted on by the other members, and the majority rule.
So far this is pretty cool. You're balancing personalities. You're ensuring that one move with one potential partner or member doesn't cause harm to a greater cause. This goes well beyond individual mechanics, and it brings group dynamics into the fold. Something I'm a big fan of. Again, sometimes you have to wrangle together. It's like herding cats. You have to wrangle together these opposing personalities and get them to realize that, hey, we have some common footing. I really like where this is heading.
So if we propose inviting Cao Cao to the coalition, for example, we can see Liu Bei looks well upon this. Diplomatic standing plays a strong role in voting, of course, so the higher your standing with other members, the more likely it'll be that they'll vote in favour of any coalition action you declare.
Okay, and that is a very big deal. If this whole aspect of diplomatic standing is pulled off right, playing the diplomacy game and the long cons can be extremely satisfying. I really wonder how much personal politics, that is to say, the relationships, actually play into these things. Can I have, off-the-record conversations with certain warlords that'll make them more likely to side with me? If I send one of my spies over, can they influence other people's courts to garner me more love and power? Or is diplomatic standing just a matter of things like +5 because we traded once? Now, Crusader Kings 2 recently added a mechanic to sway and antagonize individuals, trying to goad them into stupid decisions or get them to side with you. Will we see similar behavior here? I want to have the chance to convince my friends that we should let somebody else join our coalition, and I also equally want an opportunity to frustrate a member of the coalition and get them to leave out of that frustration when I personally have no use for them anymore. Personal politics can be extremely interesting, especially with how it ties into the larger conversation of a region. And if Three Kingdoms is supposed to be character-focused and character-driven, I really want to see those angles explored, either at launch or over time with patches and deal. At some point, I want to see Total War games start to explore those nuanced relationships between the actual people that make massive decisions. So many times, wars are fought over personal vendettas and love and things like that. I want to see those things come to life. This is a great first step in that direction at the very least.
Now that we're in a coalition, we gain visibility over our fellow members' lands, where our armies can of course now resupply on their travels. In addition, you can only switch characters and their retinues out of armies in friendly territory, and allied territory counts as this. Being in a coalition also means you're strengthening ties with increasingly friendly factions that might join you in your wars, but that is not a given. This early in the game, for example, with relatively small holdings and wars of their own to contend with, our coalition pals may not be so inclined to join in.
So this all highlights the differences between a coalition and an alliance. An alliance is an obligation, whereas a coalition is the gateway to one. So you don't have to join the wars of coalition members, and they don't have to join yours. However, I imagine and hope at times the coalition goals will line up and everybody will want a piece of the action. It'd actually be pretty interesting if coalitions were given a goal when they were formed. For example, I want to speak to other warlords, arranging a coalition to, say, keep a certain threatening warlord in check. And now, anytime I want to go to war against that particular warlord, or I need to defend myself against that particular warlord, all the coalition members are more likely to join because, hey, that's why we teamed up in the first place. I feel like it would make sense that certain people would be more likely to join a coalition for a certain cause than a different cause, and that would add another layer of, dynamics and decision-making in this whole coalition versus alliance conversation. Now, this would make coalitions more objective-oriented as well, rather than being catch-all treaties that aren't as obligation-based as alliances. That's all they kind of are right now.
As a loose arrangement, there's no formal obligation for coalition members to join each other's wars. So as we declare war on Yuan Shu, we see there's no vote required. We can then, of course, go cap in hand to our coalition members afterwards and seek their individual support in such a war. But their military support will still need some negotiation, especially if a coalition member is friendly towards the warlord you've just declared a war on.
And as we can see here, it seems that coalitions can't be exploited in the sense that you can't form one in a turn just to use it to go into a short war the turn after or the same turn. There's a huge penalty to call somebody into war if you only recently signed a treaty, and that does make sense. It does feel very exploitative, and I'm sure even in the real world somebody goes, hey, did we just become friends because you wanted to use me? Is that? And, you know, probably wouldn't go very far in life that way. Now, what concerns me a little bit, only ever so slightly, is the presence of the word never here. Is it truly a never? It looks like we can still negotiate, and surely for the right price that massive negative can be turned into a positive. So hopefully, and this is what it looks like, it's just a matter of how much the player is willing to sacrifice. At least that's what it looks like, and I really hope that's what it is.
In short, you can merrily engage in private wars without involving the entire coalition. Coalitions are easy to arrange and easy to leave too, but the benefits to maintaining a coalition are clear. Not least that the longer you're in a coalition, the better your diplomatic standing with certain factions becomes. If a faction joins and it turns out to be a thorn in your side, you can call a vote to kick them out, enabling you to manage membership, provided the other members agree.
A quick glimpse of what the map looks like at night, and we also see there are more generals that have the resilience indicator, so I'm curious how that's earned. Is that a temporary trait? Are we looking at temporary traits? That's pretty interesting. I think that's a new addition, and it would be sort of temporary buffs or debuffs based on recent behavior. That could be pretty cool. Now, here, as this coalition is being negotiated up into a full-fledged alliance, we see some more interesting pieces of information and layout of said information. We can clearly see the hierarchy here, and we see that the AI likes having vassals. We see also that the vassals have no voting power in the coalition, but I do wonder if they can influence the votes of their liege. And finally, we see that for some reason, Cao Cao has no opinion apparently. Curious what that means. Maybe it's just a bug. Again, this is early, still in development, so let's not judge anything, but I wonder if that comes from somewhere, if that's intentional.
Cao Cao and Liu Biao are all for it, but Wang Kuang isn't, meaning 3 in favour and 1 against. So Wang Kuang leaves the party and we form a military alliance with Cao Cao and Liu Biao. The key differences between coalitions and military alliances revolve around the notion of shared defence. As soon as a military alliance is signed, you become part of a defensive pact. If war is declared against a member of an alliance, that member may choose to fight the aggressor in a private war or call their allies to arms. All members of the alliance are duty-bound to uphold this and will then enter the war. You can also declare an alliance war against a third party, which of course goes to an immediate vote with the members. If the majority vote yes, the alliance will go to war with the target faction. There are only 2 ways to resolve an alliance war. Either you leave the alliance and sign peace with the opposing belligerents on your own terms, or the alliance votes as a group and once again a majority vote is needed on both sides to bring peace.
Now, I like the fact that separate pieces can be signed. If an alliance war is not going in your favor or you're taking the brunt of the damage, you might want to get out sooner. That will punish you, of course. You abandon the alliance, and I do hope that there are some pretty long-lasting diplomatic scars that come out of leaving an alliance mid-war. Yes, it should be punishing if you decide to abandon your friends. It's dishonorable, it's, rude. How dare you? So I'd like to see those punishments come back, and maybe it's a long time before any of those warlords will ever even entertain having you in their court again because of what you did to them, should they survive the war that you abandoned them in.
Any minorities opposing peace will leave the alliance and continue in private wars against the original targets. Neither coalitions or alliances stop you from engaging in private wars, of course. You can still declare war or sign peace with other individual factions at your leisure. Now, all of this adds up to a system where, over the course of a campaign, you'll see coalitions form over time as different warlords' goals and situations align.
Now, on the topic of private, alliance, and coalition wars, I love just how much variety there is on this screen. There's the ultimatum, that's the threat of war, then there's a regular war, then there's asking your lord, if you're a vassal, for permission to declare war. You can call for assistance, you can provide assistance, you can call your vassals, or you can call in your allies. You can negotiate peace with an entire coalition, or just with an individual, and you can declare an alliance war either against an entire coalition, or any one individual within it. Further, you can, on your own, declare war against the entire coalition, and at the bottom we see the opportunity to support a bid for independence, or declare an independence war of your own against a liege. Some really cool additions here, some really specific lines and paths to go down depending on your current situation. I love choice, I'm liking what I'm seeing.
The AI understands the value of such arrangements and will engage in them frequently. Some coalitions will be fleeting and will fall apart as goals diverge. Some will endure to become distinct power blocks, and some will solidify into powerful military alliances that the world begins to revolve around. Indeed, wars between significant long-term alliances become more common as the campaign reaches its later stages. Another classic diplomacy feature also makes its return in Three Kingdoms, and that's region trading.
Now, before we go on to region trading, I just want to point out that the ebbing and flowing of coalitions versus the more steadfast longevity of alliances is something I do find absolutely fascinating. It all will boil down to how well the AI understands and utilizes these mechanics, and as with the first part, my hesitation remains from one primary aspect. If the AI doesn't understand how these mechanics are supposed to be used, then it all goes down the drain. Great fun against friends, but pointless against the computer. Now again, they have stated very clearly that the AI has been rewritten from scratch to understand all of these diplomatic options and to behave accordingly. So I have hope, but of course, time will tell. I also feel like the whole voting system is really just a rephrasing of the old system of going to war. Sometimes your allies didn't join you and they broke the alliance pre-war. It's the same thing here, except it's represented as a vote rather than a declining to join. I hope there's more to it. As I mentioned earlier, I hope personal politics come into play a lot more. We haven't learned anything about personal relationship management yet, so I can't wait until we do. That's something I'm maybe most curious about now.
Alongside food, money, ancillaries, and numerous other diplomatic treaties, territory can now be used as a bargaining tool in diplomacy, and it's about the most valuable commodity going. It's a useful way of garnering major value to strike big deals, especially later in the campaign where you may have a surfeit of territory.
Now here we see population effects, and while they don't seem to limit recruitment availability and, the strength of your armies, though we can't rule that out just yet, we do see the difference that population can make to construction costs and time, income from peasants, and replenishment. The addition of the K and the M after the numbers is also a nice touch. It seems completely minor, but it makes the numbers feel more real. Good move, simple change, and I think it makes a big enough difference to the impression of those numbers on a player.
If we approach Cao Cao and click the Trade Territory option, all our owned regions are shown, listed by commandery, with their constituent regions detailed below. You can only trade away regions which are adjacent to the territory of the warlord you're dealing with. So if we were to offer territory to Cao Cao, we can see that only Yingshuan Commandery is tradable, as it's the only one next to his lands. As you can see, productive farmland is very desirable, so we can demand a lot in return. In this case, let's try 4 food per turn for 10 turns, and a regular payment of 500 gold per turn. But a big ticket item like a tract of farmland can be useful in deals where the warlord's asking price may be high. In aggregate, these many changes to diplomacy enable you to achieve more than ever before. With a host of new big-ticket assets to trade, and with the ability to forge mighty alliances between powerful warlords, the campaign power play in Total War Three Kingdoms is at once more subtle, more complex, and more far-reaching than ever before. Thank you for watching, and stay tuned for more Three Kingdoms gameplay coming very soon.
And now, right at the end here, literally, we see the tooltip say, Reform Choice Pending. So are reforms the equivalent of edicts or commandments? Are they faction-wide decisions? I'm not sure we've seen the term as of yet, so I'm curious to see what it means. Let me know in the comments if we have seen it somewhere else and it's just slipping my mind, but for the life of me, I couldn't remember seeing it, so Curious what it is. And another thing I'm curious about is, why do we have all these notifications to the side here? Why have these notifications not been cleared? All in all, the 2 parts of the diplomacy video have me quite intrigued. I've said it in the past, I'm by default a cautiously optimistic person when it comes to anything that wants my money, but this is really starting to feel like a massive step in the right direction for Total War diplomacy as a whole, beyond just this game. Important to remember will be that design is an iterative process. Will we get perfection on the first go? Of course not. Highly unlikely, near impossible, and frankly a very strange bar to set. We're seeing changes to a system that has felt very stagnant and frankly stale for a very, very, very long time, so I'm happy to at least see a very hefty rework here. Now, a lot of the concepts that we're seeing described are particularly interesting, and if they work the way they sound like they're supposed to, this is going to add a layer that Total War games have been a little lacking in. Yes, it all boils down to the AI being able to comprehend and use the tools that are available, but as always, I'm giving the benefit of the doubt until I have reason to believe otherwise. Now, are you guys excited for all these advancements in diplomacy? How do you feel about coalitions? The parallels to some Paradox games are certainly worth noting, and I frankly can't complain if the Total War games are headed in a direction that gives them more depth, with the politicking especially. So what are your thoughts? I'm quite curious what the variety of Total War players we have think about these changes, and they do seem very interesting to me, but everyone has their own opinion. I am quite curious. As always, make sure you subscribe to this channel for more Total War and strategy gaming content, be it previews, reviews, let's plays, or more. And as always as well, a big thanks goes out to all of my patrons and channel members for keeping the channel alive on a monthly basis. Big thanks, of course, to all of you for watching, and until next time, cheers.